Good morning and welcome to another program of Study the Word. My name is Chuck Bartlett and I'm the minister for the River Ridge Church of Christ that meets in Newburgh, Indiana. In a moment we're going to deal with a Bible question that has come our way. Well, I don't think we could really call it a Bible question because they're really not looking for an answer found within the Bible. But I'll tell you about that in just a few moments. I'd just like to remind our new viewers that you're going to see that phone number come up at the bottom of your screen. And of course, it's for our regular viewers also. Feel free to call in a Bible question that you might like dealt with on this program. And since we tape these a week ahead of time, give us a call, leave it on voicemail, and look for your answer on next week's program or the week after, depending on how many questions we receive. At the end of our program today, we have some useful free Bible study help, so we hope you'll stay tuned for that. But we need to go ahead and deal with this week's Bible subject. Well, why didn't I call it a Bible question? Well, because this week's question, people are not going to desire a Bible answer. And I can understand that, and I can respect it. Why? Because the question we're dealing with today is this: prove to me there is a God. Well, that's a good question. And of course, it would seem silly for me to open up my Bible and say, well, God is, because look what God said over here. Well, wait a second, Chuck. If there is no God, then God did not speak, and then this is not His Word. That makes sense. So first things first, we have to prove that God is. Next logical step, of course, would be that God spoke, proving that the Bible is God's Word. But that's not the question at hand. The question at hand is, can you prove there is a God? And, you know, it's good that we think about this. I actually have somebody call me yesterday and wanted to have a study on that particular subject. Now, this person believes there's a God, and but they just want to go back over some evidences and the proofs to have it not only to help her build up her faith and confidence and assurance, but to be able to communicate that to other people who don't believe that there's a God. And so I hope today's lesson will help you who do believe in God know what to say to help other people. Because we need to approach this from a logical, intellectual standpoint. Because there will be people who will accuse you and myself of saying, you believe there's a God because somebody told you to believe in God. Well, no. I don't believe in God because somebody else believes in God. That is not a good reason to believe in God. Somebody might say, well, you believe in God because your parents believe in God. No, if that were true, that's still not a good reason to believe in God. And so, how can I prove to you or to anybody that God is? That God does exist? Well, I think we need to start off in getting on common ground with those people who don't believe in God. We need to play by the same rules, so to speak. So, well, what do you mean by that? Well, when I say play by the same rules, we need to make sure that we keep an open mind, because, you know, somebody might say, well, I believe in evolution, so any proofs that you give me concerning God just don't exist because I believe in evolution. Or somebody might say, I believe in God, therefore I'm not even going to consider anything that the evolutionist has to say because I believe in God. You know, to close your mind and not to be open-minded doesn't help anybody. I don't want somebody to be a closed-minded believer in God, because you're not going to help people who really want to know the answer to the question. Can you prove there's a God? And if you just say yes and you can't give any proofs, and you want that person to believe in God, the sad reality is that you're trying to get them to believe in God simply because you do or because you said so. I don't want anybody to believe in God because Chuck believes in God. I want them to think it through as we're going to do on today's program, in proving that God is. All right. To also consider the level playing ground in dealing with this issue, I want us to establish the fact that we need to be logical in our thinking. And to be logical in our thinking is to understand that it is more logical, or if I can use that word, more logical, but it is logical to believe what is easier, not what is harder. In any area, whether we're talking about the existence of God or any other question that we might have on our mind. We as a society, we as a people understand that it is logical to believe what is easier. Let me quickly demonstrate that with our judicial system. You know, when somebody is charged with a crime, let's just say I was charged with a crime. I would get a lawyer. And then you would have the prosecutor who's trying to put me behind bars. Convince a jury that I'm guilty. And so let's say the prosecutor, and to further the illustration, let's say I'm being charged with a crime of murder. The prosecutor, let's say that he brings forth witnesses that actually saw me commit the crime. Let's say he has video. There was a video camera that actually caught me committing the crime. And he has the murder weapon. And of course there's the knife, because on the video camera it showed me with a knife and me stabbing somebody. So he has the weapon, he has my fingerprints on the weapon, he has the video, he has witnesses that were standing right there. All right? And he also has a motive. He finds out that the person that I killed owes me a lot of money and he refused to pay it. Okay, so he has motive, he has the weapon, he has the witnesses, he has the videotape. All right, so he presents all that evidence. Now, my lawyer gets up and he has no witnesses. And he tells the jury, my client, me, didn't do it. And then he sits down. Now, what is the jury supposed to do? Well, they're supposed to weigh the evidence. And they're supposed to believe what is easier, not what is harder. It would be hard for them to think that I'm innocent just based upon what my lawyer said. Now, as far as the prosecutor is concerned, because of all that evidence, it's easier for them to believe that I'm guilty. Now, you see that, folks. You understand that it's logical to believe what is easier, not what is harder. And so if somebody looks at the evidence of the existence of God or the evidence of evolution, and they weigh them. Now, again, I'll be fair on both sides. If a person has absolutely no proof of the existence of God, nothing to think about, and overwhelming evidence of evolution, and if a person says, well, it's harder to believe that there's a God, but I'm going to believe it anyways, well, that's not logical. That's illogical thinking. And the same thing if we switch it around. If somebody says that, well, okay, there's all this evidence of the proof of God, but in very little to prove evolution is the evidence or the fact that we need to believe. If a person says, well, I know it's harder to believe in evolution, but I choose evolution. Well, that's not logical either. And so hopefully you can see how important it is for us to believe what is easier, not what is harder. We accumulate the evidence that is there. That, folks, is how I'm going to be able to prove to you that God is. By giving you things to consider, more evidence to make it easier to believe there is a God rather than to believe there is no God. See that? All right. Where will I begin with this morning? Well, since we're talking about evolution, basically versing God, because people who do not want to believe in God they're faced with that enormous question at hand, and that is, how do you explain the existence of mankind? How do you explain the existence of the world? How do you explain all of that? And so that's why we have to talk about evolution. Now again, you might find a person who doesn't believe in God who says, well, I don't want to think about evolution. I don't want to think about that. I just want to say to you there is no God. Well, you can believe there's no God, but I'll tell you folks, without proper evidence, it's not logical to believe in it. Now, we need to make sure we clear up this misconception that a person who believes in God, people just say, well, you're a believer. Folks, everybody's a believer. You're a believer. You are a believer. I can say that without a doubt that you are a believer. Number one, you either believe in God, or you believe there is no God, or thirdly, the agnostic, that you believe that you cannot know whether there is a God or not. There's three stages in this line. I mean, three different lines of thinking. You either believe in God, you believe there is no God, or you believe you can't know, one or the other. But they're all beliefs. But my question is, what do you base that belief on? Now, I can't control, I can't change, I can't even influence somebody who just wants to believe one of those three positions for no reason at all. They just want to believe it. Well, okay, you can do that. It's not logical, but you can. But for the person who wants to think and reason this through, you're the person I'm talking to today. Chuck, prove there is a God. All right. First thing I want you to consider. I want you to think with me for a moment about the concept of evolution and what they want us to believe. You see, when I look out into this world, even in my office here, everything I see, I have a clock down here, and this clock, I look at this and I think to myself, well, who made this? Well, obviously somebody made this clock. Now, when I think about who made this clock, is that clock more complex than the person who made it? We'd say, well, no. The man who made it is more complex than that clock, and that would be correct. When you think about DNA, we are much more complex than the mechanisms in this clock. But still, follow this line of thought. Anything that I can see in my office here, as I'm looking at the camera that is filming this program today, who made the camera? Man made the camera. Wow, man must be pretty smart. Absolutely. But is the camera smarter than the man who made it? No. Even my laptop, my computer. Is the computer smarter than the man who created it? Of course not. We are far more complex than anything that we have ever made. We can think outside of this office. Let's think bigger. Let's think about the fact that people have landed on the moon, and so we've had these, we not only have satellites, but we've had rocket ships that have gone out and into outer space. Who made them? Man did. Are they more complex than man? No. Think about this. Man, who's very complex, has always made things less than themselves as far as the complexity is involved. I think of the human eye and how that they used it as a basis to create a camera. Well, what's better, a camera or the human eye? Obviously the human eye. We are far more complex. You know, if I take this clock and throw it against the wall and it breaks, and we sit here and wait until that clock fixes itself, it's not going to. But if I take a knife and I cut my hand here, not very deep, but if I cut my hand will eventually heal itself. Folks, we are far more complex than anything man has ever made. Now, why do I bring that issue up? Because I'm trying to appeal to your logic, because what we have witnessed, what we see in this world, is complex making less complex. Never, and I stress this, you can call up the program if you have a rebuttal to this, if you can prove to me I'm wrong on this, but I'm stating this as a fact, not as a theory. I'm stating this as a fact. Man has never made anything greater than himself. You have a human heart, you want to make an artificial heart. What would be better, a human heart or an artificial heart? A human heart. Man has never made anything better than himself, only less. We get that. Anything you can even think of. Now, having said that, when we think about this concept, it is the opposite when you think of evolution. You see, evolution teaches that simple became more complex. Did you get that? That's what evolution is. It's evolving into something more complex. Wow, that sounds kind of good, but this is why it's considered a theory, folks, and not a fact. Because you know what? We have never witnessed, we have never seen it demonstrated where something complex has made something more complex than themselves. Man has never made anything better than himself. Never. And he never will. It's not logical to believe in evolution because it does not exist. And so we're told to believe in something that is just contrary to logic. It's not even there. It's nowhere to be found. And so that's why we challenge this, because what we've concluded is that something greater than man made man, not something less. Well, who's greater than man? Who is greater than man? Evidence points to a higher being. God, if you will. Because that's what you're saying. You know, man didn't come from man. You know, God created man. We need to see that. And they even want man to come from a lower form of life to create the complexity that we have today. No. Everything that we've seen, we understand. So when I look at a human, I don't look at that human and I look at them and the complexity that's involved in that and say, something less made that human. No, I think something more made that human. That's why when I look at this clock, I look at that and say, wow, something inferior made this superior clock. No, not at all. Man made this. And so that's what I want us to be thinking about. The evidence of God's existence is all around us. And when we think about it and when we challenge the opposition, you will see that it is easier to believe God is rather than to believe God is not. All right? We see that. Now let me push this envelope a little bit more on this idea of the complexity of things. Because when I think about this clock and we think about how complex it is, when I show you this clock, if you found this clock outside and you're seeing it ticking away there and it has the times and all these mechanisms, you might remove the back and look and see how it's all working. Would you naturally think that there must have been some kind of explosion and the pieces fell to the ground and they formed this clock? Would you think that? You'd say, no, Chuck, I wouldn't think that. Well, what would you think? You say, well, I look at this clock and I would think somebody made this clock. And I would say, well, why would you think that? You'd say, well, I see that it has design. And therefore, there must have been a designer. I see how intricate it is. I see how it works together in harmony. And how can something, an explosion per se, that has chaos and no order to it, only disorder to an explosion, how can you get something orderly from something disorderly? It can't happen. You're not going to get all the pieces to fall to the ground and the mechanisms form together and make this clock. And so, again, we agree with that illustration. Logically, the fact is we look at this clock and we know somebody made this clock. All right. DNA. What's more complex? We touched on it just a moment ago. What's more complex? DNA, our DNA, Or this clock? And you would say, logically thinking, our DNA. It's far more complex. Man, you can put our DNA underneath a microscope and you can tell so much about a person. Maybe even their age and how that they might be susceptible to heart disease. And they're just learning more and more and more about DNA as time goes on. And so we would say, okay, DNA is more complex. And that is true. So here's my question. If we're more complex, why do we would think that DNA just happened? Why do we just think that it was just like through evolution, or if we back up far enough in time where people want, where there was an explosion, the beginning of life, energy was there, and of course that's another question we'll deal with in just a moment. But you know, we're looking at man and his complexities. Why do we think, when we look at DNA and how orderly it is and how complex it is, to think that somebody didn't make that? That it just happened? It would be easier for me to believe that somebody just, or rather not somebody, but some explosion made this clock. That would be easier for me to believe. That just happened. But then to believe in God. But no, it's not. It's not easier. It's hard for me to sit there and think for a moment that something as complex as a simple little clock could just be created through an explosion. Why would I think life could come from that too? You can't get order from disorder. That's the problem we have. Again, we're talking about which is easier, which is more logical to believe, that God is, or that evolution is, or that God isn't. The fact is, it's overwhelming when you start thinking about how that we have been created by something that is greater than us. We have design, folks. Where there is design, there must be a designer. And you think about all the problems that come along with the idea of evolution. People just think it's a slam dunk. Evolution's the answer. It doesn't pose any real serious problems. I say, well, yes, it does. If you just think it through. You have to think this through. When you think about evolution, and they tell us how that it is such a slow process, and how that it takes millions and millions, and maybe 1 billion years for things to come about, how we are where we are today. They need an enormous amount of time to support evolution because it's such a slow process. But that gets them into trouble, logically, because true science tells me that the sun gets a little bit smaller. Not much, but the sun is burning. And it's just getting just a little bit smaller every year. But not as much that you and I can notice, but the point is this. If we go back in time, 1 billion years, which makes the sun larger, it would just burn up the earth. The earth is at the right distance away. You get a little bit closer, a little bit farther away, you burn up or you freeze. And so, folks, when we sit there and say that there's proof of the evidence of God, is because we have thought it through. People often think that people who believe in God are mindless, non-thinkers. They just believe things blindly. That's not the case. I'll tell you this much. It's more the other way. That people are quick to believe in evolution. People are quick to believe in things that without true evidence. It's all the theories that are there. And people get sucked into believing things that are just a theory, and they're being taught as facts. And so this is why we come along, we say, well, no, you need to give it some thought. They'll throw out illustrations to me. They'll talk about, well, how do you explain the rabbit? And I'll say, what do you mean? God creates all things. We say, well, the rabbit, they'll say that the reason why the rabbit got faster and faster and faster is so that the fox, who could catch the rabbit, is so the fox couldn't catch all the rabbits. The rabbit evolved to run faster and faster and faster and faster. And I'm thinking, I wasn't born yesterday. If the rabbit is evolving because of that, then why didn't the animal, let's say the fox, who was trying to catch the rabbit, why didn't the fox evolve faster and faster legs to catch the rabbit? You know, this selective evolution that's going on here, you know, it's like people are saying, believe what I have to say, don't think it through, don't ask questions. We're the opposite. No, the evidence is pointing more and more to the existence of God, and when I think of evolution, all it does is pose more and more questions. To me, if evolution is true, we would be inundated with overwhelming evidence. Why? Because I'm told, everybody's told, that evolution is a very, very, very slow process. And if that's the case, we should have so much fossil evidence of every stage of evolution that we would not be able to deny it. Where is it? You know, when people find a tooth and they want to form a man around the tooth, I'm sitting there thinking, well, don't go out looking for that one missing link. Folks, you should have hundreds of thousands of billions of examples unearthed if evolution were true. But it's not there. They're finding the fossil of this species, a fossil of this species, a fossil of this species. But where's the in-between, the gradual stages that are there? Again, it just should be overwhelming, and it's just not there. I think if we just think things through, you and I can come to a proper conclusion on this. And so when we think about evolution versus God, you know, I will admit this. I cannot say, there's God, look, there he is. I can't do that. I can provide you some evidence to the existence of God. Just like I can tell people, you know, you've never met Abraham Lincoln, but I can give you plenty of proof to prove that he existed. Okay, even though you never saw him personally. You give a lot of evidence. But it's based upon this idea, when I think about God, of intelligent being with a plan and a design. That's what I think about with God. Evolution, they can't prove it. Okay, just like I can't say there's God, they can't say, well, there's evolution, without a doubt. They provide some evidence that has a lot of holes to it, a lot of questions, but theirs is based on chance with no plan or design. Just happened. Folks, which is easier to believe? That's what I'm asking you. You say, well, Chuck, I want to believe in evolution even though it's harder. You can do that. It's not logical. And you need to ask yourself, why do you believe what you believe? We try to stress that on this program. It's not so much important as to what you believe as it is why you believe it. We want to thank you for being with us today. Our time is gone. Maybe you want to call us this afternoon on our live radio program, 2 o'clock, 1400 on your AM dial, or go to our website, riverridgechurch.org, and listen then. This afternoon, 2 o'clock, listen to our live radio program. We hope you'll be back here next week as we once again study the Word of God together. Thank you and have a good day. Okay, Jim, we're done. Hey, don't forget to call in your Bible questions.